My husband worked late every night for months. I thought it was for our future, but he was building a second life with another woman. Part 1. The house with two faces. I used to wait up for him. Every night, no matter how exhausted I was after work, after folding laundry, after making dinner he never touched, I waited. Because that's what wives do, right? Support, trust, believe. At least, that's what I thought love meant. Jason and I had been married for 9 years. We weren't newlyweds anymore, and the fire had simmered down to a warm routine. But I didn't mind that. I found comfort in consistency, in how he always kissed me on the forehead before leaving, in how he texted me "late again, babe," with a little heart at the end. I believed the late nights were for us, that he was grinding, chasing promotions, pushing for the house we both dreamed of by the lake. I even felt guilty sometimes, guilty for being annoyed that he missed dinner, guilty for the loneliness creeping into my evenings. I told myself, he's doing this for us. But Jason wasn't building our future, he was building hers. It started with a mistake, a tiny ripple in our well-rehearsed script. I noticed a receipt in the laundry, a boutique I'd never heard of, women's clothing. Must have been a client gift, he said with a shrug. I wanted to believe him, and I did, for a while. But then came the scent. Not mine, not ours, but sweet and unfamiliar on the collar of his shirt, the way he started guarding his phone like it was made of secrets. He began to act like a man who was always somewhere else, even when he was right in front of me. His smile became hollow, his kisses, polite, routine, like checking a box. And one night he didn't come home at all. He claimed he'd fallen asleep on the couch at work. He didn't even try to lie convincingly. That's when something in me shifted. Not rage, not sadness, just stillness. The kind of silence that comes right before a storm. I followed him the next week. I lied and said I was going to visit my sister. Instead, I stayed in the city and watched. I watched as he picked her up from a bookstore, young, soft-spoken, with a scarf wrapped too neatly for the weather. I watched them laugh in a way he hadn't laughed with me in years. I watched him carry her groceries, kiss her forehead, touch the small of her back with casual intimacy. He took her to a place we used to go, that little Italian spot we discovered on our 3rd anniversary. I sat in my car across the street, shaking so badly I thought I'd throw up. But I didn't. I stayed. Because I needed to see it. Because something inside me, the part that had been gaslit into silence for years, needed proof. He wasn't working late. He was living a second life. I didn't confront him right away. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. I wanted to scream and cry and break every dish in our fake little kitchen. But I knew he'd lie. He always lied, smoothly, easily. So I waited. I gathered, watched, documented. It wasn't just an affair. It was a full-blown parallel existence. He'd helped her get a car, in cash. He stayed at her apartment 3 nights a week. He told her I was just a roommate. He was helping until she got back on her feet. I even saw a photo of us still on his phone, cropped and filtered. But there, she didn't know. She believed she was the only one. Just like I once did. Part 2. The day I let him bury himself in lies. I didn't scream. I didn't throw his clothes onto the lawn or scratch his car or call her in the middle of the night. I waited. Because sometimes silence is louder than rage, and I wanted him to walk himself straight into the grave he was digging, shovel in hand, lies still dripping from his mouth. The day I planned to confront him, I made dinner, lasagna, his favorite. The same recipe I'd used on our first date at home all those years ago. I set the table for 2. Candles, wine, soft jazz humming from the kitchen speaker. I wore a dress I hadn't touched in years, the one he used to say made me look like the girl he married. I didn't do it to win him back. I did it to give him the stage, to see if he'd lie, even when I gave him every chance to come clean. He came home late, as always, and paused when he saw the table. "Wow," he said, setting his briefcase down. "What's all this?" I smiled. "Just wanted to reconnect." He blinked, just for a second. That blink, that hesitation, told me everything. He was suspicious, but he couldn't figure out why, and that made it even more perfect. We sat, we ate, we talked. I asked him about work. He spun tales of meetings and deadlines, of his overworked boss and long hours and a new intern he had to train. I nodded, listening, chewing slowly, swallowing every single lie. "Do you remember that little restaurant we went to for our 3rd anniversary?" I asked casually. He glanced up. Of course. What about it? Funny. I saw someone there last week who reminded me of you. He stiffened, just slightly, then reached for his wine. Oh? He said. Yeah, looked just like you. Same coat, same hair, same wedding ring. He smiled, the kind of smile people give when they're trying too hard to stay calm. Lots of guys wear this coat. Sure, I replied. But not everyone kisses a woman on the corner of 8th and Rose and tells her he loves her. He froze, wine glass halfway to his lips. And in that silence, that perfect dead silence, I finally saw the real man behind the face I had loved for nearly a decade. Her name's Lily, I said. He blinked. She likes poetry. You met her at that bookstore event. You told her you were separated. He opened his mouth. I held up my hand. I know everything, Jason. And then, calmly, methodically, I began to lay it out. The photos, the screenshots, the receipt from the jewelry store he thought he'd hidden in his work laptop bag. I could have screamed. I could have begged. But I didn't, I said, because I wanted to give you a chance to be a man, to tell me the truth. His face turned pale. Sarah, No, I cut him off. You don't get to say my name like it still means something to you. The look in his eyes, the panic, the guilt, the desperate scramble for control would have broken me once. But not that night. That night I didn't cry. I rose, cleared the plates, and handed him an envelope. Inside it, copies of everything. Every lie, every betrayal, every piece of the double life he thought he'd gotten away with. I'm not yelling, I said, because you're not worth my voice. The next day I was gone, not just emotionally, physically, legally. He came home to an empty closet, a quiet house, and a key that no longer fit the lock. I didn't leave a note. He didn't deserve one. Lily reached out to me months later. I don't know how she got my number, but her voice trembled when she said, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. He told me you were just his tenant. I know, I replied, and I meant it, because I had been her once, the woman who believed his stories, who believed he was working late for love. Part 3, the quiet aftermath of a shattered life. There's a silence that comes after betrayal, not peaceful or healing, but haunting. It's the kind of silence that hums beneath the surface of everyday life, reminding you that something once alive has died. That was my world in the months after I left Jason. At first, I didn't know how to exist without the structure of our life. Mornings were the hardest. I'd wake up reaching for someone who wasn't there, for a routine that had evaporated. The coffee maker still brewed 2 cups out of habit. His side of the bed stayed cold. His toothbrush sat untouched for weeks before I threw it out like a rotten fruit. I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, no memories, and windows that overlooked a quiet alley instead of the garden I once tended. I chose it for that exact reason. I needed distance from the life I had built, the one he destroyed. Some nights I just sit on the floor, knees to chest, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and wonder how I missed the signs. How did I love so blindly? But the truth is, when you love someone that deeply, you choose to believe them. You choose to believe in them. And that belief, that hope, becomes a blindfold you willingly tie around your own eyes. Friends reached out, some with comfort, others with gossip. I filtered most of it out. I didn't want to know what Jason was doing, who he was seeing, or whether Lily was still around. I didn't care. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I was trying to breathe. Then came the day he called. I stared at my phone as it rang, his name flashing like a warning. I let it go to voicemail. He called again and again, then texted. Can we talk? Please. I need to explain. There was nothing left to explain. Betrayal doesn't need subtitles. I didn't respond. Not out of bitterness, but self-preservation. I had spent too many years giving him my time, my attention, my forgiveness. That well was dry. The first time I laughed again, truly laughed, was 3 months after I left. It was over something stupid. A pigeon landed on my windowsill with a potato chip stuck to its foot and strutted around like it was wearing a crown. I burst out laughing so hard I cried, and then I realized it was the first time I had cried out of joy in longer than I could remember. Healing comes in strange forms. A chip-footed pigeon, a neighbor's dog that greeted me every morning, a cashier who complimented my earrings. Bit by bit, the world started to rebuild itself around me, not because it owed me anything, but because I chose to stay open to it. Eventually, I ran into Jason. It was at the grocery store, of all places. He looked tired. Not thinner, not broken, just dulled. Like the light in him had faded. He was pushing a cart with a few lonely items, instant noodles, a six-pack of beer, and laundry detergent. He froze when he saw me. "Sarah," he whispered. I didn't run. I didn't yell. I didn't even flinch. I just nodded. "Jason." His eyes darted around, looking for something. Emotion, a sign, anything he could use to pull me back into his orbit, but I had nothing left to give. And that was the power. That was the freedom. He spoke, trying to explain, to apologize, to rewrite the ending. But I smiled softly and said the one thing I had waited months to say. "It's okay." He looked confused. "I don't forgive you because you deserve it. I forgive you because I deserve peace." And with that, I turned and walked away. Because this is what betrayal does. It burns down everything you were, but gives you the soil to grow into something new. I'm not who I was, and I never want to be again. Part 4. The woman I found after the fire. Grief doesn't always look like sobbing on the bathroom floor. Sometimes it's staring at your reflection and realizing you don't recognize the woman blinking back. That's who I became in the months following Jason's betrayal, a stranger to myself. But grief is a bridge. You don't live on it. You walk across, and eventually I started walking. I enrolled in a pottery class on a whim. I'd never touched clay before, but something about molding something broken, something shapeless, into form. It felt right, therapeutic. At first my hands trembled. Every curve I tried to shape collapsed. But the instructor, an older woman named Elena, just smiled and said, "Good, now do it again." So I did, again and again. I failed, then failed better. Then started to shape things I didn't hate. Mugs, bowls, vases, imperfect, lopsided human. One day I sculpted a teacup with a jagged crack running through it. I glazed it in gold, inspired by the Japanese art of kintsugi, repairing the broken with beauty. That cup sat on my windowsill, a reminder that broken doesn't mean ruined. I also started writing, not for anyone else, just for me. It began as angry letters to Jason I never intended to send, then turned into journaling, then short stories, then reflections on who I had become, what I had allowed, and what I was no longer willing to accept. There was something sacred about seeing my truth in black ink. It was like holding a mirror up to my soul and saying, "I see you. I won't abandon you again." I made new friends too, people who hadn't known me only as Jason's wife, women who saw me, not my past. There was Camilla, a single mom in the pottery class, who invited me to join her for coffee one day. We ended up talking for hours about parenting, betrayal, healing. Her strength was quiet but firm, and it reminded me of who I wanted to be. There was Josh, the barista at the cafe down the street, who remembered my name and my order and once offered me a free muffin because, in his words, "You looked like you needed one." I didn't fall in love with him. This isn't that kind of story. But he made me laugh. And sometimes laughter is a kind of love too. And slowly the days stopped hurting. Not because the pain vanished, but because I built something around it. Purpose, routine, peace. There were still moments when memories hit me like waves. A song, a scent, an old email I forgot to delete. But instead of drowning, I let the wave pass. And I stood. One morning, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Jason in weeks. Not with rage, not with longing, just nothing. He had become a chapter, one that mattered, but one I had finished. That day, I packed up the last of our wedding photos, the old gifts, the letters, the things I'd held on to just in case. I took them to a thrift store in a box labeled simply, "No longer mine." And as I walked away from that box, I smiled, not a triumphant smile, a free one. I'm not the woman I was before Jason's betrayal. She was softer, sweeter, naive maybe, but she loved hard. She believed. And I'm proud of her. But I'm proud of me now too. This version of me is stronger, wiser, fierce in her boundaries. She doesn't wait for someone to rescue her. She built her own raft from the wreckage. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You can survive a fire, but you get to decide who walks out of the ashes. Part 5. The letter I never sent. It sat in the drawer for months, tucked beneath old receipts, half-filled notebooks, and forgotten keys. The letter, folded, worn at the edges, written in a moment of sleepless clarity. I never planned to send it. But I wrote it because I had to, because some truths need to be spoken, even if only into silence. Jason, there was a time I would have given everything for your happiness. I did, in pieces. I bent myself into versions that suited you, quieted my needs, softened my anger, carried your shame. I wore your failures like they were mine to fix. And for what? For love? No. For the illusion of it. You cheated. That's the easy part to name. But it was the silence that broke me. The way you'd turn away mid-sentence, the absence in your eyes long before the betrayal ever took shape, the lies you told without moving your lips. You made me doubt the soundness of my mind, question my instincts. You made me feel crazy for noticing. And then you made me feel small for caring. I've replayed it all. Every late-night call you took in the bathroom, every deflection, every time you said, "You're overthinking again." I wasn't. I was drowning. And you were standing on the shore with dry feet and a lifeline you never threw. You chose someone else, not just with your body, with your attention, your secrets, your truth. And then you expected me to stay whole. But I broke. And in that breaking, I found the pieces you never bothered to look for. I found me. I never mailed the letter. It wasn't for him. It was for the version of me who once waited up at night for a text, who searched receipts for clues, who cried quietly so Lily wouldn't hear. It was for the woman who tried to hold together something that was already ashes. That letter was a goodbye, not to Jason, but to the illusion of safety I had built around him. And once I wrote it, I didn't need anything from him anymore. Not an apology, not closure, not even regret. Months passed. Spring melted into summer. The light lingered longer. And with each sunset, I noticed something shift inside me. Not a scar fading, but a strength forming. One day, while taking Lily to a park downtown, I saw him, Jason. He stood across the street holding hands with Ava. They looked like a picture. Coordinated clothes, small smiles, a polished kind of happiness that reminded me of our early days. He didn't see me, and I didn't flinch. I turned to Lily, helped her adjust her helmet, and watched her race toward the playground. Her laughter filled the air like a song I hadn't heard in ages, bright, bold, and free. That's when I knew I had finally let go. Not because it stopped hurting, but because I no longer needed the hurt to remind me of what I deserved. I framed the gold-glazed teacup I made in pottery class. It hangs in my kitchen now, beside a quote I wrote after finishing the letter. Let them go, but never forget what it taught you about staying. Because staying isn't always brave. Sometimes walking away is the beginning of everything. Part 6, When Love Found Me Again. Love didn't come back with a bang. It didn't sweep me off my feet or arrive with grand gestures and poetic words. It came softly, like morning sun on my kitchen floor, like Lily's tiny hand in mine. Like peace, real peace, blooming where there had once been only questions and grief. It started with a smile, at the bookstore of all places. I was helping Lily choose a chapter book when a man next to us chuckled at her commentary on why dragons were cooler than unicorns. He had kind eyes, tired eyes, not from weariness, but from living. From knowing what it meant to lose and to keep going anyway. We exchanged small words, polite laughter, nothing flirtatious, just human. His name was Mark. He was a widower with a daughter Lily's age. He understood bedtime routines and early morning tantrums. He knew how lonely it could feel to have no one to share the little wins with, the she slept all night victories that go unnoticed by the world but mean everything when you're doing it alone. We bumped into each other again a week later, then again, and slowly, conversations turned into coffee into walks into weekends with both girls squealing on the swings while we talked about everything and nothing. There were no sparks. There was warmth, and that was better. I was cautious, not because I didn't like him, but because I had rebuilt too much of myself to ever hand it over blindly again. Mark never asked me to. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't tiptoe around my pain. He simply stayed, consistently, kindly. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, we sat on my porch. The air was heavy with the scent of night-blooming jasmine. He looked at me and said, "You don't have to rush. I'm not going anywhere." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was being chased into healing. I was allowed to arrive at it on my own time. One night, I told him everything, about Jason, the affair, the silence, the way betrayal unmade me from the inside out. Mark listened, not with pity, but with presence. When I finished, he said quietly, "Sometimes love fails us, but that doesn't mean we failed love." I cried. Not because I was still broken, but because I realized I wasn't. We never made big declarations. We made dinners together, grocery runs, blanket forts on the weekends. We carved out a space that felt like safety, not the suffocating kind I once clung to, but the breathable kind, the kind where I could exhale and be fully seen. When he kissed me for the first time, it didn't undo the pain of the past, but it didn't have to. It was its own story, its own beginning. One night, as Lily slept on the couch and Mark was tucking his daughter into the guest room, I walked into the kitchen and saw my reflection in the window. Not tired, not afraid, just me, whole, standing in a life I had built with blood, tears, grit, and grace, a life that hadn't gone to plan, but had become something beautiful all the same. People think stories about infidelity end with heartbreak or revenge or starting over alone, but sometimes they end like this, with quiet mornings, with someone bringing you coffee because they remembered how you take it, with a child's laughter echoing through a home filled not with perfection, but with truth, with love, not as a rescue, but as a reminder, you are still worthy, even after, especially after. Part 7. The letter I wrote to my younger self. Dear me, you don't know it yet, but everything you believe is solid will one day fall apart. The man you love, the one you swore forever to, will betray you, not with cruelty, but with cowardice. He will lie, then pretend he didn't. He will look you in the eyes and say, I love you, with someone else's perfume still clinging to his collar. And it will break something sacred inside you. You will cry so hard you'll lose your voice. You'll scream into pillows because your daughter is sleeping in the next room, and you don't want her to hear the sound of a woman unraveling. And you will ask yourself the question no one should ever have to ask, why wasn't I enough? But I'm writing to you from the other side, the part you can't see yet, to tell you this. It was never about you, not your body, not your cooking, not your smile, your laugh, your sacrifices, or your unwavering loyalty. His choices were his own, his weaknesses, his wounds, his failure to fight for what mattered. All his. You were enough. You still are. You will survive. Barely, at first. You'll learn to breathe around the pain, like someone swimming with stones in their pockets. You'll forget how to laugh, until one day your daughter says something absurd and you'll snort mid-sob and realize joy can live next to grief. You'll rebuild, not all at once, and not without setbacks. But piece by piece, you'll gather the parts of yourself he discarded and polish them like sea glass. Stronger, wiser, softer where it matters, tougher where it counts. You'll learn to love again, but not like before. Not from desperation or fear or fairy tales. You'll love with eyes wide open, with boundaries, with tenderness that asks nothing but honesty. And when he arrives, not on a white horse, but with patience and truth, you'll know. You'll recognize the difference between chemistry and connection, between charm and character. And this time you'll choose with your whole self, not just your heart. You'll forgive, not for him, never for him, but for you, because you deserve a life not defined by what he did. You deserve sleep, peace, the sound of your own laugh without bitterness under it. You'll forgive because dragging his betrayal into every tomorrow is a weight you're no longer willing to carry. And best of all, you'll fall in love with yourself, in the quiet mornings, in the way you make your daughter pancakes in funny shapes, in how you dance barefoot in the kitchen again, in how you survived and chose to thrive. You'll look in the mirror and see her, the woman you were meant to become, not despite the pain, but because of it. So cry, sweet girl. Mourn the dream, but know this. Your story didn't end with betrayal. It began with fire in your chest and softness in your soul, with truth, with courage, with you, love, the woman you grew into. Part 8. The day he apologized and why I didn't need it anymore. It happened on a Sunday, a quiet, sunlit afternoon when I was folding laundry, my daughter humming in the next room, and my phone lit up with his name. I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't saved the number, but I still knew it. Muscle memory, pain memory. I didn't answer at first, but something in me, maybe closure, maybe curiosity, made me press call back 10 minutes later. When he picked up, he sounded exactly the same, and completely different. Hey, he said, voice thick with something like regret. I've been meaning to call, I owe you an apology. There was a time I would have burst into tears hearing those words. I would have begged for details. Asked all the questions that had haunted me. Who? When? Why? But not anymore. Now I stood in a room filled with clean clothes and quiet healing. I was not the woman he left. I was not the woman he broke. I was someone new, someone I fought to become. So I let him speak. He told me he was sorry for the lies, for the betrayal, for the way he watched me break and didn't try to stop it. He said he'd been a coward, that he'd been selfish, that what we had deserved better, that I deserved better. And for a moment, I saw him not as the villain of my life, but just as a man, flawed, scared, human. That didn't excuse him, but it made him small. And somehow, that made me feel big again. He paused, waiting, maybe hoping for forgiveness, or connection, or the chance to rewrite history. But I didn't give him what he wanted. I gave him the truth. I don't hate you, I said calmly. I did, for a long time, but I don't anymore. I just don't need anything from you. Silence. Then, I understand. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. He was still trying to heal his guilt. I had already healed my life. I didn't tell him how hard it had been, how many nights I cried until I shook, how I slept on the edge of the bed for months, instinctively avoiding a ghost. I didn't tell him about the therapy, the journal pages, the wine-stained pillowcases, the long walks where I talked to God and begged for strength. He didn't need to know, because that part of the story wasn't his anymore. It belonged to me. And I didn't need him to understand. I just needed to be free. When the call ended, I didn't feel lighter. I felt clearer. It wasn't his apology that gave me peace. It was knowing I didn't need it. Forgiveness didn't come from his voice. It came from choosing myself every single day since the moment he walked out. Later that night, I tucked my daughter into bed and kissed her forehead. She looked up at me with sleepy eyes and said, "Mommy, are you happy now?" I smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I finally knew who I was. Not someone's wife, not someone's heartbreak, not someone's mistake to regret. Just me, strong, whole, free. "Yeah, baby," I whispered. "I really am." The end.